Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my July wrap-up. So once again, my wrap-up is coming super late. I have reasons. We've been so busy over the last few weeks. If you hear jingling, it's Jinx. She's a curious soul. Anyway, yeah, we've been doing stuff like pretty much every weekend so far in August, which means that my filming time has been non-existent. So if you've noticed that I have not been on Twitter or BookTube or literally anything, it's because I haven't had a single chance to film, and I've been kind of slumping. Thanks, Jinx. I've kind of been slumping throughout August already, so it is what it is. We're pushing on through. As far as reading months go, though, July wasn't too awful. I think I finished 9 books. It might be 8. I think one of those I'm technically still in the middle of. 8 or 9 books. I'll let you know at the end. We are going to try something a little bit different this month, though, and we'll see how it goes. So I know that I've talked a little bit about it on my channel before, but I do track my reading via a spreadsheet. Usually I just let that be for my own personal use or like in terms of end of the year book stats. But I don't think it would hurt to talk about my like monthly book stats either, so we're gonna start with that. In the month of July, I finished 8 books. 1 fantasy, 1 mystery, 5 romances, and 1 kind of horror, historical. I don't really know how to classify it, so that's just where I put it. 7 of them were 4 stars, 1 was a 5-star, and then I read 2 of them as ebooks, 3 of them were e-arcs, I read 3 of them audibly, and then 1 of them I read in multiple different ways. 7 of them were adult, and then 2 of them were YA. But the very first book that I read in the month of July was Say No More by Karen Rose. I've talked a lot about Karen Rose on my channel. I have recommended her in a bunch of different various situations. I know that in my If You Like This TV Show, You Might Like This Book video, I believe I recommended her entire series If You Are a Criminal Minds fan. That still stands. If you're a Criminal Minds fan, I 100% think that you would love her entire collection of books. She writes romantic suspense, only romantic suspense. I don't think she's ever branched out into anything other than that. She has lots of rep that you don't generally see included in a lot of like mass market published or traditionally published romance, and I have been reading Karen Rose probably since middle school or junior high. So she started off writing about a group of people in Chicago and them falling in love, and she's branched out to multiple cities, and she writes different series in different cities and blah blah blah. So she has been finishing up a series in Sacramento, and it all revolves around a cult. In the very first book in this series, it follows Gideon and Mercy. Gideon is a survivor of a cult that he kind of had been shoved into as a child, which he escaped as a teenager. He is now an FBI agent, and he ends up falling in love with a radio personality named Daisy. I might have called her Mercy before. Mercy comes into play in the second book a little bit more, but she is Gideon's sister. So in the first book, Gideon is an FBI agent, and Daisy is a radio personality who almost gets kidnapped by a serial killer, and the only thing that she has to identify him by is a locket that she ripped off of his neck. And this locket is something that Gideon instantaneously realizes is tied into the cult that he escaped as a teenager. It kind of shoves everything into motion in terms of the 3 books in this series, and you follow them as they fall in love, and there's romance and there's suspense, and it's great. So the second book, Say No More, follows Mercy, who is Gideon's sister, and Rafe, who is Gideon's best friend, and I believe a Sacramento police officer. So I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. I really always tend to enjoy Karen Rose's books pretty much without fail. They always kind of just take me out of Amber's made her appearance. So they pretty much take me out of whatever I'm dealing with or thinking about at that moment, and I am a huge fan of Criminal Minds, and so it's definitely something that always interests me in terms of like storytelling. And I'd never actually read anything revolving around a cult before, and I know that she generally consults a lot of people in terms of the things that she's writing about, and she did the same thing here, and I really think that she came through. I enjoyed every single moment of their relationship and their story. It was stressful. I do kind of wish that a little bit more had been wrapped up in terms of the cult. But that comes into play in the third book, which I read later on in the month, and I will talk about in just a minute. The second book that I read in July was Night's Shadow by Sebastian de Castell. I loved this book. I loved the first book. I think I actually enjoyed the first book a little bit more, which might not be the popular opinion. I know that the first book kind of sets up the rest of the Greatcoats series, but if you don't know what this is book 2 of the Greatcoats. The Greatcoats is a series that follows Falkio, Brasti, and Kest, who are 3 of the last remaining of the King's Greatcoats, who pretty much travel the land, or used to travel the land, before they were disbanded and their king murdered. Serving justice in the king's name. It's just so entertaining. His writing style is so entertaining. His humor is like right on par with everything that I enjoy. It just makes me laugh out loud. It's so funny and it's so relatable. I mean, as much as a pure high fantasy book can be, I think that the characters being so flawed is so interesting to read about, especially because you're only reading about it from Falkio's first-person perspective. But the things that he went through in this book were just traumatizing in so many different ways. And I think that might have affected my enjoyment of it a little bit more than that of the first one. And there's a particular romantic subplot that I just don't understand or enjoy at all, which was a little bit more prevalent in this than it was in the first book, and so it definitely was a little bit less enjoyable. But ultimately I did end up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really still liked it, and I do plan to continue on with the series. I just really enjoy the characters a lot. I enjoy the characters, I enjoy Sebastian de Castell's storytelling. I just can't wait to see what happens to them next after all they've already been put through. The next book that I read was Say Goodbye, also by Karen Rose. This was a book that I was approved for the e-arc for on NetGalley, which blew my mind. I was so excited about it because, like I said, I've been reading Karen Rose since I was in like junior high, and so to be approved for an arc of one of her books was probably not a big deal to a lot of people just because she's not really a bigger author, but super, super exciting for me. So this is the third book in the Sacramento series that she has ongoing. Like I said, it all revolves around a cult. This book revolves around Liza and Tom. Now, Tom is a beloved character from a previous book that she has written. He started out as like a very, very young character, and so if you've kept up with the series or read all of her books, then you've kind of grown up with him to the point where he is ready for his own book at this point. Liza is also a character from a different book. They first met when Tom was in his college years, and that all happens in a different book as well, and just seeing them reunited and seeing how they've grown throughout the years was really, really great, and I really enjoyed their love story. However, I do feel like because a lot of their relationship development had taken place in other books in the series, it was kind of left out of this storyline, which was left to focus a lot more on the cult plot and wrapping up all of the loose threads that she's been building and just focusing a lot on that. And so I did end up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars as well. Like I said, it doesn't focus quite as much on the romance and a lot more on the mystery, which was so interesting, and seeing all of the ties come together that she's been building up throughout this series was so interesting that I don't think that I particularly minded, but I did kind of miss all of those great scenes that she's usually so good at writing in terms of the romance between the two characters. The next book that I read was Well Played by Jen DeLuca. I've had the ebook of this sitting on my Kindle for a very long time. After I read Well Matched earlier on this year, and I absolutely adored it, I could not wait to move on in the series. And so Well Matched follows Stacy's story. Stacy was Emily's best friend from the first book. If you had read Well Met, it is all about a woman moving to a small town to take care of her sister and her niece, and getting deeply involved with the town's Ren Fair and falling in love with its organizer. So the second book does follow Stacy, who ends up becoming one of Emily from the first book's best friends. She's just looking for love. She hasn't had a lot of luck in relationships, and she accidentally, kind of drunkenly, messages a guy from the Ren Fair that she has been hooking up with the last couple of summers. And a conversation ensues where she thinks that they are falling in love, and it turns out that she is actually being catfished. I'm not going to go too much more into all of that, but I didn't think that I would love that storyline quite as much. I ended up really, really enjoying it. I did give this 4 out of 5 stars just because the lying in romance novels is a hard pass for me usually. And they kind of explain the mentality for a lot of it, but it's just something that in romance novels gives me anxiety because you know that it's going to come to a head at some point and everything's going to go downhill. It's just the miscommunication thing, but deliberately. And in this book, I think that it was really well done. It didn't bother me quite as much as I thought that it would. So, well played does follow Stacy and another character as he is catfishing her, and you are well aware of that. I believe it's in the synopsis. This is not a spoiler. But yeah, I liked it. I did not love it like I loved the first book, which is why I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, and this book just made me so happy on so many different levels. This is for all of the super nerd fans out there and is a great romance novel. It was steamy, it was funny, it had a lot of body positivity because the main character is plus size and she owns it and she is proud of herself and where she's at in life, and it was just so great. And she ends up falling in love with the main character of a very Game of Thrones kind of meets Spartacus like show, I would say. He is, I believe he's like around 40 or in his 40s or about to turn 40, somewhere in that range. The show is almost over. He's trying to figure out what to do next with his career, but he has the issue where he has been seen as a kind of airheaded pretty boy throughout his entire career, and he's wondering whether or not it's time to change that image. Whereas she is a former geologist, soil engineer kind of type, who is a mega fan of the show. She writes fan fiction, and she ends up going on a date with him for reasons that I won't really get into, and they just kind of take their romance from there, and it was great. It was funny. It gave you all of the good feels. I blew through this book in one single day. I loved it so much. I did get approved for the e-arc of the second one on NetGalley, and I will be moving on to that as soon as I can because I'm so excited to revisit these characters and see how they're doing and see what comes next for some of the friends that we met in the first one. The next book that I read in the month of July was Dreadnation by Justina Ireland. This book follows Jane McKean, who lives in a time during the Civil War where mostly black people and occasionally white people if they volunteer were kind of just forced into learning how to fight hordes of zombies. The dead began to walk shortly after, I believe, the Battle of Gettysburg, and so they're dealing with zombies in the aftermath of the Civil War, and they're like in training in schools, and it was so good. I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect anything that happened to be the case. There were so many plot twists that I had no idea what was coming next. Jane's voice was so entertaining. I listened to this as an audiobook primarily. I think I might have finished it as a physical book, but I mostly read it audibly. And the narrator was so good. The entire thing was so entertaining. I definitely want to move on to book 2 in the series because it did leave off on a teensy bit of a cliffhanger, and I can't wait to find out what happens next. But I did end up giving this a full 5 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was Well Matched, which is the final book in the Ren Fair, I don't know if it has an actual name for the series, but the Well Met Ren Fair trilogy. So this is the 3rd book. I actually was approved of an e-arc for it on NetGalley, and I was in a romance mood, so I decided to just keep going with it. And so this book follows Emily's sister, April. She is 12 years older than Emily. She has a daughter. She is divorced, and she is just trying to make things work as a single mom. She doesn't need anybody. She's super independent. And she's a character that you've kind of gotten to love over the last 2 books as just a steady presence in all of them. And this follows her romance with Mitch, who is kind of like the bad boy, kilt-wearing hottie of the Ren Fair. He's the gym teacher, he is adorable, he's a friendly, bubbly guy, and he ends up falling in love with April, who is the single mom who doesn't need any help from anybody ever. It was really great. It did a lot of really good social anxiety rep on April's behalf, and I can definitely say that I related to that a lot. It was just entertaining, and it was an age gap romance. She is significantly older than him, I believe. She's in her late 30s, and he's probably maybe barely turning 30. But it was really interesting, and it was really fun to read. I definitely think I enjoyed it more than Stacy's story, but I did still give it a 4 out of 5 stars, just because some of the decisions that April made just really annoyed me so much. It was miscommunication, not done as well as it had been done in the previous book. But I did still really enjoy it, and as a whole, I love this trilogy. I love the romances. I will definitely recommend them to anybody that has ever wanted a fun, fluffy Ren Fair romance. And the very last book that I managed to finish in July was The Curse of the Spectre Queen by Jenny Elder Moak. The premise of this sounded so good. She's, I think, Indiana Jones, but like a woman in the early 1900s. And she's kind of like a librarian slash book restorer, and it was just such a great premise. There are Celtic curses and druids and all sorts of fun stuff like that. A treasure quest kind of a thing. It sounded so great, and I listened to the audiobook, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. I think I finished it with an ebook. I just didn't like this as much as I had expected to, and I really started to drag about halfway through. And I don't know that this is the cause of the book or like me, because I think I was starting to go into a bit of a reading slump when I started this. But you follow Samantha Knox, who has always kind of wanted to be an archaeologist, but is the product of her times, and women don't really do that in the early 1900s, so she lives vicariously through her best friend's brother, who is in fact going to school for that exact thing. A mystery kind of tumbles into her lap in the form of a package arriving at the bookshop that she works at, and it leads to her needing to follow all sorts of clues to try and find a specific bowl for a specific ceremony that is happening in, I want to say, Ireland, before evil can be unleashed upon the world. That's essentially the premise of this. So she ends up working with her best friend and her best friend's brother, who she is secretly in love with, trying to stop evil from being unleashed. It sounded so great. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. It's really more of a 3.5 for me, though. I just think that it read a little bit younger than I wanted it to, and normally the mentality and the actions of men in like historical settings don't bother me quite as much. But in this, the brother, whose name I can't even remember, and it's not even in the description. So whatever the brother's name is, he was obnoxious. He was insufferable. He was constantly trying to stop her from doing things that like she wanted to do and he knew that she wanted to do. It was just insufferable. I could not stand him, and because of that I really couldn't root for their relationship. Like, I have no idea what she ended up seeing in him in the end. So yeah, I didn't really love the romance, and I really think that it read a little bit too young for me. I kind of wish that this had been written in like more of a new adult or adult type setting, because I think that the author could have taken a lot more risks with it that way, and I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But it was still really interesting. I think that I would like to read the next book in the series, thanks Ember, and see how they all grow as characters, or at least in his case, I hope that they grow as characters. There were a couple of plot twists that I mostly ended up calling earlier on. Like I said, I just think that it reads a little bit young, and I really think that this is mostly a me thing and not the book thing. So I do definitely think that if any of that interests you, you should give it a shot, and especially because, like, look how beautiful this cover is. It's absolutely gorgeous. I do have a few honorable mentions because I started to read No Lin by Michael J. Sullivan. I received an e-arc of that from NetGalley, and I started, and I just could not. This was the beginning of my reading slump, so that is probably the majority of the reason why I couldn't get into it. I'm going to keep trying to push through. I started listening to the Steel Crow Saga by Paul Kruger, and I've been enjoying that. And then I also started reading They Met in a Tavern by Elijah Menchaca, which I received an e-arc of from Edelweiss. So we're moving along. I'm trying to get some reading done. I have not really succeeded in accomplishing much reading yet this month, but like I said, we've been slammed, and it's been a time. So that is it for all of the books that I read in July. I will try and make sure to link all of these down below in the description, where you can also find a couple of affiliate links and my Goodreads, Twitter, and Instagram. I think that is it for me today, guys, so I will talk to you on my next video. Bye!